The cargo restraint cable snapped with devastating force, sending the steel bracket careening across the C-130 Hercules cabin at lethal velocity. Master Sergeant Victor Brennan was demonstrating proper exit technique when the bracket struck his left knee with bone-crushing impact. The wet crack of splintering bone cut through the engine roar like a gunshot. Brennan collapsed onto the aluminum floor, blood spreading beneath him through torn camouflage fabric. His leg twisted at an impossible angle, and several rookie paratroopers turned away in horror. The aircraft banked sharply through turbulence as it approached Fort Liberty's drop zone, loose equipment rattling against bulkhead walls. 30 young soldiers pressed against their harnesses, watching their jumpmaster writhe in agony. These were Basic Airborne Course students, fresh from 3 weeks of ground school, about to make their first solo jumps. Now their training exercise was collapsing at 12,000 feet. Welcome to Real Heroes Stories YouTube. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from today. Staff Sergeant Derek Martinez had been sitting quietly in the rear cargo section, methodically reviewing supply manifests and inventory sheets. His clipboard balanced on one knee, pen moving steadily across standardized forms. At 44, he possessed the weathered face and lean build of someone who had spent 2 decades in military service, but his current quartermaster assignment kept him invisible to the combat troops around him. The accident occurred during the aircraft's 3rd approach run over the designated landing zone. Weather conditions were perfect: crystal clear skies, minimal wind shear, visibility extending for miles in every direction. These students had been building toward this moment since arriving at airborne school. They had practiced exit techniques until movements became instinctive. They had memorized emergency procedures until they could recite them under pressure. They had visualized successful landings countless times. Colonel Amanda Torres, the senior officer observing the training operation, immediately moved toward the injured instructor. Captain James Fletcher, commanding the aircraft, began coordinating with ground control for emergency medical evacuation. Disappointment was visible on every young face in the cabin. Some students had traveled across continents for this opportunity. Others faced recycling through training if they missed this critical jump window. But as medical personnel worked frantically to stabilize Brennan's compound fracture, something unexpected began developing. Martinez quietly secured his paperwork, unfastened his safety harness, and moved forward through the crowded cabin with fluid movements that suggested deep familiarity with aircraft operations under stress. The injury was severe: bone fragments visible through torn uniform fabric, requiring immediate surgical intervention. Brennan remained conscious but was fighting through waves of pain as the medic applied pressure bandages and prepared him for evacuation upon landing. Blood loss was becoming a concern, and time was critical. Martinez reached the forward section just as Colonel Torres was deciding to abort the entire mission. Standard protocol demanded immediate return to base, rushing Brennan to medical care and rescheduling the exercise when a replacement instructor became available. Students would be disappointed, but safe. Training schedules would be disrupted, but manageable. It was the prudent decision, the safe decision, following established procedures that minimized risk. That's when Martinez stepped forward and surprised everyone aboard. He approached Colonel Torres with quiet confidence, requesting permission to assume control of the jump exercise. His voice carried calm authority despite chaos developing around them. He spoke knowledgeably about wind conditions, drop zone characteristics, and student readiness levels. Colonel Torres studied him with sharp attention. Here was a logistics specialist whose job involved inventory management and supply coordination, volunteering to take responsibility for 30 untrained paratroopers in one of the military's most dangerous training operations. But something in Martinez's demeanor gave her pause. He wasn't seeking attention or demonstrating bravado. His questions about aircraft capabilities and remaining fuel suggested operational knowledge inconsistent with his supposed qualifications. When he discussed student preparation and exercise completion, he demonstrated understanding of airborne training that exceeded casual familiarity. Captain Fletcher checked instruments and calculated fuel supplies. They had sufficient aviation gas for exactly one more approach run. After that, regardless of decisions made, they were committed to returning to base. The opportunity window was closing rapidly. 30 students watched this exchange with expressions mixing hope and desperation. They had invested weeks of intensive preparation for this moment. Physical training had pushed their bodies beyond previous limits. Academic instruction had filled their minds with technical knowledge. Psychological preparation had helped them overcome natural fears about exiting aircraft at high altitude. What none of them realized, not Colonel Torres, not Captain Fletcher, not even Master Sergeant Brennan drifting through pain medication, was that Derek Martinez had spent the previous 15 years as one of the Army's most experienced pathfinder instructors and jumpmaster specialists. His record included over 2,100 successful parachute jumps, including more than 500 combat insertions in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had conducted training missions in Colombia, teaching counter-narcotics operations to elite units. He had spent 18 months in the Philippines, developing jungle insertion techniques with Scout Ranger battalions. He had deployed to Jordan for desert parachute training with International Special Operations Forces. Martinez had written significant portions of the Army's definitive manual on advanced parachute operations, including chapters covering emergency procedures and high-risk insertions. He had been personally responsible for developing several rescue techniques now standard protocol throughout special operations units worldwide. His expertise extended beyond basic parachute operations to include high-altitude, low-opening missions, night insertions, and combat jumps under hostile fire. His personnel record contained commendations from 4 different theater commanders, recognition for innovations in parachute training safety protocols, and a reputation as one of the most skilled jumpmaster instructors in the entire military. He wasn't simply qualified to conduct the training exercise, he was exceptionally overqualified. The reason none of them knew this was straightforward. Martinez had deliberately chosen obscurity. When questioned about previous assignments, he mentioned infantry service before transitioning to logistics support. His personnel file accurately reflected qualifications, but didn't convey the full scope of operational experience. But there was a reason for this deliberate anonymity. 3 years earlier, Martinez had been conducting a nighttime training exercise at Kandahar Airfield in Afghanistan. Weather conditions had been marginal when operations began, but deteriorated faster than meteorological forecasts predicted. Standard procedures would have mandated aborting and postponing until conditions improved, but his students faced combat deployment within days, their final training opportunity before entering hostile territory. Martinez made the decision to continue despite worsening weather, trusting his extensive experience and student preparation to overcome challenges. Most jumps proceeded normally, but one student, Specialist Anthony Rodriguez, a 19-year-old from Texas, encountered severe wind shear during descent. The wind shear caused Rodriguez's main parachute to collapse at 350 feet above ground level. His reserve deployed successfully, but he still impacted at dangerous velocity in rocky terrain. The resulting injuries included multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and traumatic brain injury requiring months of intensive medical treatment. Rodriguez eventually recovered and returned to active duty, but the incident profoundly shook Martinez's confidence in his decision-making abilities. He began questioning whether risks inherent in advanced parachute training were justified, especially involving young soldiers still developing judgment and technical skills under pressure. After extensive soul-searching, he requested transfer to support duties where decisions wouldn't directly impact others' physical safety. He specifically chose quartermaster responsibilities to remove himself from training operations while still serving meaningfully. For 3 years, he had managed supply operations, carefully avoiding situations where his judgment might endanger others. He convinced himself this approach was responsible, protecting young soldiers from consequences of his potentially flawed decision-making. But now, confronted with 30 disappointed faces and perfect jumping conditions, Martinez found himself reconsidering that self-imposed exile from operational duties. These students had worked exceptionally hard reaching this point. They deserved the opportunity to complete training under optimal conditions. Colonel Torres made her decision based on operational necessity combined with intuitive assessment of Martinez's capabilities. Students required qualified instruction. Martinez was volunteering his services, and something about his confident demeanor suggested knowledge exceeding official records. She authorized him to assume control, understanding that responsibility for outcomes rested entirely on his shoulders. Martinez moved to the aircraft's forward section and began addressing students with calm authority that immediately captured complete attention. He avoided lengthy explanations or motivational speeches, focusing on essential safety procedures, confirming everyone understood their jump sequence, and initiating methodical pre-jump inspection processes. He moved through equipment checks with practiced efficiency. Each parachute received thorough examination, straps and buckles adjusted with precision that exceeded standard training protocols. When he identified deficiencies, loose chest straps, improperly positioned reserve handles, twisted risers, he corrected them quickly and continued without unnecessary commentary. Students quickly realized their quartermaster possessed knowledge far exceeding his job description. His movements were precise and confident, inspection techniques more thorough than anything they had experienced during ground training. Several observant students exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing expertise that didn't correspond with Martinez's supposed qualifications. Private Samantha Rivera, a 23-year-old from Arizona, who had struggled with confidence throughout the training program, found herself feeling more secure under Martinez's guidance than during previous exercises. His quiet competence was reassuring, suggesting extensive experience handling unexpected situations successfully. Private Michael Chen, whose hands had been trembling with pre-jump anxiety, noticed his nervousness diminishing as he observed Martinez working methodically through equipment checks. The quartermaster's professional demeanor was calming, and his meticulous attention to detail suggested nothing would be overlooked. When Martinez reached Private Jordan Thompson, a slight 18-year-old who appeared younger than his chronological age, he paused slightly longer than with other students. Thompson was obviously nervous, and his parachute configuration wasn't quite correct. Instead of simply making adjustments and moving forward, Martinez invested additional time ensuring everything was perfect and that the young soldier understood modifications made. Captain Fletcher announced 2 minutes until green light over the aircraft's communication system, and Martinez positioned himself at the aircraft door. What happened next would become legendary at Fort Liberty, because instead of demonstrating standard exit technique taught to beginning students, Martinez executed a flawless military free-fall position, revealing years of advanced specialized training. He departed the aircraft with textbook precision, maintained perfect body position during controlled descent, and deployed his parachute at exactly 4,000 feet with movements so fluid they appeared effortless. His canopy opened cleanly, and within seconds he was maneuvering toward drop zone center, with accuracy demonstrating extensive experience in much more challenging environments. What students couldn't observe from their aerial vantage point was Martinez's pinpoint landing within 6 feet of intended target coordinates. He established radio communication with the aircraft before his boots completely settled on solid ground, and his voice began guiding the first student through exit procedures with professional calm that inspired confidence. Private Rivera was designated as initial student to jump, and her aircraft exit was clean and controlled. Martinez's voice in her helmet radio was steady and encouraging as he coached her through descent procedures, offering gentle course corrections and positive reinforcement. She landed safely within designated boundaries, executed a near-perfect parachute landing fall, and immediately began equipment recovery with a smile illuminating her entire face. Students continued jumping in predetermined sequence, each guided by Martinez's precise radio instruction. His guidance was expert and effective, helping each individual navigate minor challenges that inevitably arose during parachute operations. Slight wind variations, minor equipment complications, small navigational corrections. He handled every situation with calm expertise developed through extensive operational experience. But Private Thompson provided the exercise's most dramatic and dangerous moment. Something malfunctioned during his main parachute deployment sequence. Instead of the clean, controlled opening experienced by other students, his canopy partially failed during inflation, creating a dangerous spinning descent, accelerating his fall rate well beyond safe parameters. Established protocol required immediate deployment of reserve parachute, but Thompson was panicking. His hands fumbled frantically across his chest, searching desperately for the reserve activation handle, while his malfunctioning main chute continued spinning above him. He was descending rapidly toward a cluster of tall pine trees at the drop zone's eastern edge, and at his current trajectory and velocity, serious injury appeared almost unavoidable. From his ground position, Martinez could observe the emergency developing with clarity that comes from extensive experience managing high-stress situations. He immediately began sprinting toward Thompson's projected impact coordinates, while simultaneously coaching the panicked student through reserve deployment procedures via radio communication. Other instructors positioned around the drop zone were also moving, but none were optimally positioned to provide assistance if Thompson's reserve chute failed to deploy properly. Martinez covered ground with impressive speed, his boots striking sandy soil rhythmically as he coordinated multiple rescue efforts while maintaining constant radio contact with the descending student. Thompson's reserve parachute finally activated at approximately 800 feet. Dangerously low altitude, but sufficient for survival if subsequent procedures executed flawlessly. Unfortunately, reserve deployment created additional complications, including a flight path directing him toward the tree line and terrain completely unsuitable for standard parachute landing techniques. Martinez reached the forest edge precisely as Thompson began his final approach sequence. His next actions violated several established safety protocols, but almost certainly prevented serious injury or death. Rather than maintaining recommended safe distance and relying exclusively on radio guidance, he positioned himself directly beneath Thompson's descent path and began shouting navigation instructions audible even above wind noise through pine branches. The emergency landing technique Martinez coached Thompson through wasn't included in Basic Airborne Course curriculum. It was an advanced procedure developed for special operations training involving high-risk insertions into hostile territory. His knowledge of such techniques, combined with his ability to teach them effectively under extreme pressure, indicated expertise far exceeding what anyone would expect from a quartermaster sergeant. Thompson executed the complex maneuver with remarkable precision considering his previous panic state. He impacted the ground forcefully, but rolled correctly, avoiding serious injury through proper technique. More importantly, he had successfully completed his first parachute jump under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. When Martinez reached him moments later, the young soldier was shaken but unharmed, and his confidence had been restored through successful completion of his training objective. Students and instructors who witnessed the rescue operation were beginning to understand that what they had observed exceeded capabilities typically associated with supply support personnel. Martinez had not only managed a complex emergency involving multiple participants, but had also demonstrated advanced techniques suggesting extensive specialized operational background. As the final students completed their descents safely, all successful jumps achieved with no injuries beyond minor abrasions, questions began emerging about Martinez's actual qualifications and experience. Colonel Torres approached him as he assisted students with equipment recovery and preparation for return transport. Her inquiries were direct and specific, but Martinez's responses remained characteristically modest. He had accumulated some experience over the years, he explained. He had performed infantry duties before transitioning to logistics support. Nothing extraordinary, simply practical knowledge gained through service. Captain Fletcher had landed shortly after students completed their jumps and had been monitoring the entire operation through aircraft-mounted binoculars. His background included special operations flights in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and he recognized genuine expertise when he observed it. The radio procedures, emergency management techniques, and professional composure under pressure weren't capabilities someone developed casually. The revelation came when another instructor mentioned never having seen the emergency landing technique Martinez had used with Thompson. It wasn't documented in standard training publications, and certainly wouldn't be familiar to personnel whose military experience was limited to supply operations and inventory management. Confronted with increasingly pointed questions, and recognizing that his operational background was no longer concealable, Martinez made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself. He agreed to explain his actual qualifications and experience, with understanding that such information wouldn't be disseminated beyond the immediate group. His explanation over the following 15 minutes clarified everything that had occurred that afternoon. Derek Martinez had spent 15 years as a pathfinder specialist with the 82nd Airborne Division, including 9 years as senior jumpmaster instructor for the division's Special Operations Training Detachment. His record included over 2,100 parachute jumps, more than 500 combat insertions, and over 300 high-altitude, low-opening missions conducted under hostile conditions. He had served as primary instructor for foreign military training programs in Colombia, developing counter-narcotics insertion techniques for Colombian Army Special Forces. He had spent time in the Philippines, creating jungle parachute procedures with Scout Ranger units. He had deployed to Jordan for desert operations training with special forces from multiple allied nations. Martinez had authored significant portions of the Army's comprehensive manual covering advanced parachute operations, including emergency procedure sections detailing precisely the techniques he had used helping Thompson. He had been personally responsible for developing multiple rescue procedures that had become standard protocol throughout special operations units worldwide. His personnel record contained official commendations from 4 different theater commanders, formal recognition for innovations improving parachute training safety, and a reputation as one of the most skilled jumpmaster instructors in the entire military establishment. His qualifications for conducting the exercise they had just completed weren't merely adequate, they were exceptional to an almost unprecedented degree. The obvious question concerned why someone with his extraordinary background and demonstrated expertise was working as a quartermaster instead of continuing in special operations instruction. His answer revealed deeply personal motivation behind his career transition. The Kandahar incident had changed everything. Rodriguez's injuries, the months of recovery, the knowledge that his decision had put a young soldier in danger, it had shaken Martinez's confidence to its core. He began questioning every aspect of advanced parachute training, wondering whether risks were justified when lives hung in the balance. After extensive introspection, he had requested transfer to support duties where his decisions wouldn't directly impact others' physical safety. He specifically selected quartermaster responsibilities because they would remove him from training operations while still enabling meaningful military service. For 3 years, he had managed supply operations and avoided situations where his judgment might endanger others. He had convinced himself this approach was responsible and protective of soldiers who might suffer from his potentially flawed decision-making. But the afternoon's events had compelled him to reconsider that self-imposed isolation from operational duties. The 30 students who completed their first jumps under his supervision had done so successfully, safely, and with confidence that would benefit them throughout their military careers. They had achieved objectives they had worked diligently to accomplish. Observing their celebrations following successful jumps, Martinez realized his withdrawal from training operations hadn't actually enhanced anyone's safety. It had simply deprived other students of benefiting from his experience and expertise. Risks would exist whether he participated or not, but his involvement could minimize those risks and improve probabilities of successful outcomes. Private Rivera approached him as the group prepared for return transport to the aircraft. Her gratitude was heartfelt and perceptive, acknowledging not only what he had accomplished that day, but recognizing that he had overcome personal reluctance to resume responsibilities that clearly held deep meaning for him. Her observation resonated with everyone who heard it. Martinez had not only enabled 30 students to complete their parachute training safely, but had also confronted his own fears about returning to work that had defined most of his professional career. The afternoon represented as much personal growth for him as training achievement for the students. Master Sergeant Brennan, despite his pain and medication effects, managed to express appreciation as medical personnel loaded him into the helicopter that arrived at the drop zone perimeter. His words were simple but profound, acknowledging that Martinez's actions embodied the fundamental essence of military service, accepting responsibility when others needed assistance, regardless of personal cost or inconvenience. Colonel Torres's response was more practical but equally meaningful. She informed Martinez that his personnel records would be updated to accurately reflect his actual qualifications and operational experience, and suggested the military would benefit significantly from having someone with his expertise more formally involved in parachute training operations. The return flight to Fort Liberty was subdued but positive in atmosphere. Students were physically exhausted but emotionally exhilarated, bonded through shared experience and knowledge that they had completed their first parachute jumps under circumstances that tested everyone involved. They had learned valuable lessons about courage, competence, and the importance of hidden talents emerging when needed most. The most significant transformation, however, occurred within Martinez himself. For 3 years, he had been avoiding operational responsibility in the name of safety, but had discovered that avoiding responsibility wasn't actually safer. It represented a different type of risk. The risk of allowing fear to prevent him from utilizing his capabilities to help others achieve their potential. During subsequent months, multiple developments emerged from that afternoon's events. Private Thompson, whose confidence had been restored through successfully completing his jump despite the emergency, excelled in advanced parachute training and eventually qualified for special operations assignment. His near-catastrophic malfunction had become a learning experience that strengthened his resolve and technical understanding. Private Rivera discovered that her initial nervousness had been concealing natural aptitude for high-risk operations. The confidence she gained from that first successful jump, combined with Martinez's encouragement, led her to pursue advanced training opportunities. She became one of the top performers in subsequent courses, eventually earning selection for an elite airborne unit. Private Chen, whose pre-jump anxiety had been so evident, found that completing the exercise under emergency conditions had eliminated his fears entirely. He went on to become a jumpmaster instructor himself, often referencing that day at Fort Liberty, when explaining to his own students how expertise can emerge from unexpected sources. Most significantly, Derek Martinez accepted appointment as senior instructor at the Army's Special Operations Parachute School. His first class of advanced students included 6 graduates from that emergency exercise at Fort Liberty, soldiers who had specifically requested assignment to his program because they had witnessed firsthand what expertise and sound judgment could accomplish under pressure. The transition wasn't simple for Martinez. He continued carrying memories of Rodriguez's injury and still felt the weight of responsibility that accompanied making decisions affecting others' lives. But he had learned that the most appropriate way to honor the student who had been injured under his supervision wasn't to stop teaching. It was to teach more effectively, with greater wisdom, enhanced caution, and deeper respect for the gravity of such responsibility. His reputation as an instructor grew rapidly throughout the special operations community. Students valued his emphasis on safety without compromising training quality. Fellow instructors respected his ability to manage complex emergency situations with calm professionalism. Command personnel appreciated his capacity for developing innovative training techniques that improved both safety protocols and operational effectiveness. The incident at Fort Liberty became a case study in military training programs, not just for the successful emergency management, but for the broader lesson it contained about hidden expertise and the importance of stepping forward when skills are needed. Martinez's story was used to illustrate how past failures could become sources of strength when properly processed and understood. Most importantly, Martinez had discovered something about himself that would benefit him throughout the remainder of his career. His genuine expertise wasn't limited to parachute techniques or emergency procedures. It encompassed helping other people overcome their fears and accomplish objectives they hadn't believed possible. The afternoon at Fort Liberty had reminded him why he had originally chosen to become a paratrooper. It wasn't for adrenaline or prestige or recognition. It was for opportunities to help young soldiers discover their own courage and capabilities, to guide them through challenges that would enhance their strength and confidence. Rodriguez, the soldier whose injury had driven Martinez into self-imposed exile, eventually learned about the Fort Liberty incident. He reached out to his former instructor, not with blame or resentment, but with gratitude for the lessons learned through adversity. Their conversation, awkward at first but ultimately healing, helped Martinez understand that avoiding risk entirely wasn't honoring Rodriguez's sacrifice. It was diminishing it. The quartermaster had returned to operational duties, but had brought with him wisdom that comes from confronting failure and learning from it. He understood now that genuine safety didn't result from avoiding risk. It came from managing risk intelligently, with respect for both dangers involved and importance of objectives being pursued. His teaching methodology evolved to incorporate lessons learned from both success and failure. Students under his instruction learned not just technical procedures, but also decision-making frameworks that would serve them throughout their careers. They learned that expertise carried responsibility, but that responsibility shouldn't become paralysis. Years later, When Martinez had trained hundreds of additional students and seen many of them go on to distinguished careers in special operations, he would often reflect on that afternoon at Fort Liberty. It had been a turning point, not just for 30 young paratroopers, but for himself. The day when he learned that stepping back into the arena, despite past failures, was the only way to truly honor those who had been hurt along the way. 30 young paratroopers had learned that heroes sometimes appear disguised as supply clerks, prepared to step forward when courage and expertise are needed most. But Martinez had learned something more valuable, that sometimes the most important battles we fight are against our own fears and limitations, and that victory in those battles enables us to help others achieve their dreams. The lesson was simple but profound. In every field of human endeavor, there are individuals who possess valuable expertise but have withdrawn from using it due to past disappointments or fears about future failures. The challenge involves recognizing when those fears are protecting us from genuine dangers versus simply preventing us from contributing our best efforts to help others succeed. That afternoon demonstrated the power of quiet heroism, not the variety that seeks attention or recognition, but the type that emerges when people overcome their own reluctance to help others accomplish their goals. Sometimes the most profound impact comes from those who simply do what needs doing, when it needs doing, because they possess the skills and knowledge to help. Martinez's story reminds us that sometimes the most important decision we can make is choosing to try again, to step forward when our skills are needed, and to trust that experience combined with wisdom can enable us to perform better the second time. The 30 students who completed their first parachute jumps that day learned about courage not only in the air, but also on the ground, from a man who had faced his own failures and discovered the strength to overcome them.